We are taught that love is earned through compromise, through effort, through proving ourselves over and over, that if you just show how much you care, how much you're willing to give, someone will stay. But in my decades of research, I've found a sobering contradiction. The more a woman over-manufactures in a relationship, the more she teaches her partner to under-manufacture. This creates an invisible bind: give more, receive less. Be available, yet feel ignored. Love harder, yet feel lonelier. And so many women find themselves in this exhausting loop, not because they're weak or needy, but because they've confused love with performance. Here's the emotional contrast. There's a quiet, self-assured power in not doing, in holding back what was once poured out, in refusing to manage both sides of the relationship. And the truth that often goes unspoken: real intimacy doesn't come from how much you chase. It comes from how honestly you show up and how calmly you walk away when your worth is not being mirrored. So I'll ask you a mirror question. Who are you when you stop performing and simply stand in your truth? The work begins not in adding more effort, but in subtracting the behaviors that dilute your dignity. One of the most damaging myths in modern relationships is the belief that the more effort you put in, the more love you'll receive in return. It sounds noble. Give without condition, be endlessly understanding, always communicate. But here's the truth I've seen repeatedly in my decades of research. When one partner overexercises, the relationship begins to underdiminish. This is especially true for many women in relationships with emotionally unavailable or avoidant men. Let's start with the framework of bids for connection. In a healthy relationship, we all send out subtle signals, small everyday invitations for closeness. A woman might say, "You wouldn't believe what happened today," not just to share, but to feel seen. But if these bids are routinely ignored, dismissed, or met with silence, a damaging pattern forms. She may start to over-explain, repeat herself, or escalate, not because she's dramatic, but because she's emotionally flooded. That's when the nervous system goes into survival mode, hijacking clarity with panic, and urgency replaces grounded communication. Insight. The more you chase emotional presence, the more emotionally absent they become. Why? Because over-pursuing triggers avoidance, and avoidance makes you pursue harder. This is the classic pursuer-dancer dynamic, a loop I've seen lead to resentment, burnout, and deep disconnection. Here's where we introduce a behavior insight, a healing loop behavior. You notice yourself texting repeatedly when he pulls away, hoping for a sign of care. Insight, what you're really longing for isn't the text, it's emotional safety. Healing. You begin to self-regulate before reaching out, pausing, breathing, asking yourself, what am I needing right now that I keep outsourcing to someone else? This is where self-soothing becomes not just a coping skill, but an act of emotional self-respect. My research shows that couples who thrive long-term are not the ones who avoid conflict. They're the ones who can self-regulate in conflict. The woman who learns to pause, name her emotion, I'm feeling unimportant right now, and choose silence over spiraling is not suppressing her feelings. She's honoring them. And when that silence is conscious, not punishing, not manipulative, but grounded, it becomes a boundary. It says, I no longer abandon myself just to be heard by someone who isn't listening. Let's talk about love maps, a cornerstone of emotional intimacy. Love maps are the detailed internal roadmap you have of your partner's world, their hopes, fears, daily stressors. But here's the pitfall. When a woman does all the emotional labor to know her partner deeply, but isn't known in return, she ends up emotionally starved. aha, insight to emotional intimacy must be mutual to be meaningful. You cannot carry the emotional blueprint for two people. If he doesn't update his love map of you, then you're not in intimacy. You're in service. This leads to an important internal reframing. If you find yourself justifying his coldness by saying, he's just not good at expressing himself, ask, what part of me feels safer explaining away emotional neglect than confronting it? That question isn't meant to blame, it's meant to awaken, because confronting it starts with one silent but powerful act, withdrawing the labor that's being taken for granted. And finally, let's visit the four horsemen: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, which predict divorce with over 90% accuracy when left unaddressed. Many women fall into the trap of preemptive emotional caretaking, softening their words, shrinking their needs, or avoiding topics altogether to prevent his defensiveness or stonewalling. But over time, this leads to self-erasure. Silence, when chosen from clarity rather than fear, becomes your shield. It's not passive, it's discerning. It tells the nervous system, I'm not in danger. I don't need to prove, fix, or perform right now. From that place, dignity returns, boundaries form, and the need to be chosen fades because you've finally chosen yourself. These don'ts are not about playing games or punishing men. They are about interrupting the emotional habits that exhaust you. You don't win connection by over-puncturing. You build it by standing in your truth calmly, quietly, and consistently. That is where your power lives. Her name was Alina. She was the kind of woman who remembered the smallest things, how he liked his coffee, what songs made him nostalgic, even the stories behind the scars on his hands. She showed love the way many of us do, through caretaking, attention, availability. But somewhere along the way, what started as devotion became depletion. Alina had been with Daniel for almost 2 years. In the beginning, there were long talks under dim lights and Sunday mornings tangled in sheets. But slowly his responses grew short. His presence grew thin. His emotional availability started to mirror a ghost, sometimes warm, sometimes completely unreachable. And Alina, like many women raised to believe love is proved through effort, tried harder. She became fluent in emotional overexpression, explaining her feelings 3 different ways, sending check-in messages when he pulled away, adjusting her needs to keep the peace. Maybe I'm asking for too much, she whispered to herself one night, rereading a message she never sent. The quiet ache of that night still lived in her chest. She remembered the way she stared at her phone, waiting for him to call after another argument he avoided. The screen lit up once. Her heart jumped. But it was just a reminder to drink water. She hadn't cried yet. Not until that moment. She did what she always did, crafted a long message explaining how she felt, how she wasn't blaming him, how she just wanted to be heard. Her thumb hovered over the send button. And then she paused. For the first time, she noticed the silence not as absence, but as information. She noticed the ache not as punishment, but as truth. She deleted the message, not in anger, not in a strategy to make him miss her. She simply asked herself, what am I giving that I never receive in return? Her body exhaled before her mind caught up, and it came, that whisper-like voice, the one buried under years of self-abandonment. This is not love, this is performance. That night, she didn't cry. She didn't chase. She sat on the edge of her bed, feet on the floor, and met herself in the mirror. Not literally, but emotionally. And she saw it clearly. It wasn't too much. I was just unprotected. Alina didn't walk away from him that night. She walked back to herself. The next morning, she didn't text first. She didn't re-explain. She made a cup of tea, lit a candle, and wrote down 10 things she had given to someone who didn't know what to do with them. She wasn't trying to make him miss her anymore. She was remembering what it felt like to be missed by herself. Closure isn't getting them back, it's getting you back. One of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships is the idea that connection is built by constant effort. Often, women are socialized to believe that emotional closeness requires them to do more, explain more, forgive more, fix more. But in many cases, over-fictioning actually weakens the very connection they're trying to preserve. From a clinical perspective, what we know from the Gottman Institute is that sustainable intimacy arises not from effort alone, but from emotional regulation, attuned communication, and mutual respect of boundaries. Let's begin with a tool that seems deceptively simple, but has profound neurological and emotional effects, the 60-second pause before reacting. In our research, particularly in analyzing conflict between couples, we found that emotional flooding, the physiological state of being overwhelmed during conflict, leads to responses that are reactive, defensive, or overly accommodating. Taking 60 seconds to pause activates self-regulation, not suppression. It gives the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning, a chance to re-engage before you make a decision from a dysregulated emotional place. Try this tonight. If he says something that stings or doesn't respond in the way you were hoping, place one hand on your chest and breathe. Don't rush to fix it, clarify it, or even reply. Just pause. You are not responsible for instantly stitching the gap in connection. You're responsible for holding your ground in dignity. The second tool is what I call a sacred ritual of return. Return to self, not to the relationship. It's a nightly check-in that asks one question: what did I give today that I did not receive in return? This is not to fuel resentment, but to build awareness of patterns where your emotional energy is moving outward without reciprocity. By identifying where you are overextending, you begin the quiet, powerful process of realignment. Sacred doesn't mean dramatic. Sacred means intentional. You deserve to be in the practice of noticing when you disappear inside your relationships. Here's a Gottman-backed insight that reshapes how we think about emotional needs. In our research, we have found that bids for connection, those small gestures like a look, a sigh, a comment about your day, are the fundamental currency of emotional intimacy. When these bids are consistently ignored, turned away from, or minimized, relationships decay. So one thing a woman should not do is make repeated bids toward a partner who continually dismisses them. Instead, redirect that energy inward. Use the 3-1 internal repair method for every emotional trigger or unmet bid. Offer yourself 3 self-calibrations. That might sound like, it's okay that I wanted to feel seen. My needs are not a burden. That silence hurt, but it doesn't define my worth. This kind of internal repair is not selfish. It's psychologically necessary. Without it, you begin building a sense of self on emotional deficit rather than emotional truth. And finally, let's look at how we reframe the most common toxic pattern: over-explaining. Many women believe that if they can just find the right words, they'll be understood and things will change. But what we've learned is that chronic explaining is often a response to not feeling emotionally safe. It's not communication, it's a trauma loop. Here's the reframe: I don't need to be understood by someone who doesn't value understanding. Understanding is not earned through repetition, it's revealed through reciprocity. When that's not present, explaining becomes exhausting. You don't owe anyone a thesis on your worth. To summarize, these tools are not about withdrawing from love. They're about engaging with it more wisely. Pause before reacting. Reflect on your giving. Validate yourself with intention. And most importantly, trust that your energy is worth protecting. because peace isn't something you negotiate for, it's something you decide to allow. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that isn't physical. It's not solved by sleep. It lingers in the body like static, tight in the chest, heavy behind the eyes. It's a kind of exhaustion that comes from trying too hard for too long to be chosen, to be seen, to be enough. And I want to speak to the woman sitting with that ache in her bones right now. You may not say it aloud, but somewhere inside you're asking, why doesn't he hear me? You explain. You shrink. You wait. You replay conversations to figure out what you could have said better. You start treating the relationship like a test, hoping if you just pass the next question, he'll finally get it. That's not love. That's emotional over-delighting. And here's the goosebump moment. What if the silence you're so afraid of is the exact place your healing begins? What if stillness isn't what pushes someone away, but what brings you back home to yourself? From decades of research, I can tell you this. When a woman stops chasing emotional scraps, she doesn't become cold, she becomes clear. She no longer texts to get reassurance. She no longer bends her needs into softer shapes just to keep the peace. Instead, she starts asking better questions. Questions like, does this connection honor me or just distract me from my loneliness? And this is where the mirror truth enters. What if you weren't too much just unprotected? Too emotional? Too sensitive? Too intense? No, you were unguarded, wide open, hoping love would meet you there. And when it didn't, you blamed your openness instead of recognizing the absence of safety. So let's talk about detachment, not the cold kind, but the wise kind. Detachment says, I can love you and still let go of needing your approval. Detachment says, my dignity matters more than your validation. And detachment, when done with integrity, becomes the quiet restoration of self-worth. Because here's the truth. When you stop performing to earn closeness, the right people begin to reveal themselves because your energy no longer hides the truth. And those who only stayed because you made it easy to be chosen, they fade. That's not a loss. That's clarity. So what's the transformation to carry forward? It's this. I no longer abandon myself to be capped. I stay rooted in who I am, whether they stay or not. That's not emotional distance. That's emotional adulthood. You're not invisible. You're not too much. You were simply never meant to prove your worth in a space that couldn't see it. Now you see it, and that changes everything. You remember how we began with the ache of over-functioning, with the quiet fear that maybe love required shrinking yourself to fit inside someone else's comfort zone? We challenged that. We saw that performing, chasing, explaining, none of it brought us closer to intimacy. It only moved us further from ourselves. And now you know something deeper. Dude, you've moved from asking, what do I need to do to be loved? To declaring, I am already worthy, nothing needs to be proven. You are no longer the woman who waits for validation like rain in a drought. You are the woman who knows. Your peace is not a prize for someone else to give. It's a baseline. It's home. The shift is this. You are no longer defined by how much you're willing to give. You are defined by how well you protect your emotional integrity. And so when it comes to the things you should not do with men, perhaps the most sacred of all is this: do not disappear inside someone else's potential. Because you, as you are aware, awake, and whole, are not too much. You're simply unprotected. Now you're not. Your boundaries are not walls, they are doors. They don't keep love out. They let the right love in.